Everything turned on and screen sharing. I think we are ready to go. So again, we have a chat window that you're able to type in. It'd be great to get a little test of that chat window for a verification to see if you are, for one, able to hear me, and also to see if you're able to currently see my computer screen. All right. So we definitely got a test, and this is what we're going to be creating today. Basically, this is a combination of uh, three-dimensional objects, clip art, and combining it with a two-dimensional sign and how we're going to create this. If we take a look at the 3D view, just quickly, I've already got some toolpaths set up in here. The toolpaths that I created was mainly for displaying to the end user what this sign was going to look like, mainly to show a picture of this. So we'll take a closer look at everything that is going on here in the order of things, not necessarily the way I would initially cut this and set this up. But we'll start from like kind of start to finish on what is really going on here, how we could get these colors to show up, and just how to use the clip art functions, and also bringing in a model that is as an external file importing that. So as this goes along, we'll again just ask questions using the chat window. I could see that up there, and ask them away, and we'll get to it. So right now what we're going to do is jump over to a new version or a new instance of Aspire. Right click and open up Aspire. We're going to set up a new job, and the create new file. The size, so we want to make sure that we are set up for a single-sided project. That's what we have here. The width and the height is basically your material size. Some people like to set up their machine bed size. That's what I used to do. Then I realized, well, that's not right, because you can't quite see if what you're designing is fitting on the screen or not. So I've now gone the other way, and I do actually enter in material size. So I'm going to enter in a material size of 14 for the X, 10 inches in the Y, and 0.75 for the Z. I always want to make mention, this is a question a lot of people ask, where is it best to zero, to the machine bed or to the material surface? It really doesn't matter what one you do. The biggest thing that does matter is when you go to your machine, that you set your machine Z0 to the same as what you have set the Z0 position here in VCarve Pro or Aspire. A couple advantages of one versus the other is if we are concerned about how deep into the material we are cutting. So say V carving, we're doing some V carving, and we want to know exactly where the top of that material is to be able to get a precise, nice, clean, sharp corners. We might want to zero to the material surface. And by doing that, we know exactly where that is, and we don't have to know the exact thickness of the material. Now, if we are, say, a cabinet maker or somebody that is more concerned about cutting all the way through the material, not real concerned about how deep into the material we're going, but we are cutting all the way through, and we don't want to cut into the machine bed by any kind of great amount, we could set the Z0 to be the machine bed, and then we don't have to be as accurate as far as entering in our material thickness. But again, it really doesn't matter which one you do. It's just a reference point. In entering in the material thickness is able to set both of them. So we're going to go with machine bed. A couple other things to think about with that zeroing as well. Some jobs take multiple bits. Not all of us have tool changers. So when we change bits, we will need to re-zero that Z for that bit change. if we have our table or our machine completely covered up with the material and we set the Z0 to the machine bed, we may not be able to get down to the Z0 or to be able to set that 0 to the table surface. So it might be a case where you are forced to do it to the material surface. But at any rate, that is about the Z0ing position. The next one down is the XY data position. Basically the same thing with the Z0. It doesn't matter where you set it to, as long as whatever you do here in vCarve Pro and Aspire, you do the same thing at the machine. So typical Z0 is the lower left corner, which is indicated by this red dot. And once all that is entered in, now the modeling resolution and such here, we could increase that to get a little bit higher screen resolution and makes a little bit more crisp model. There is a trick to get it a little bit higher, but for a job size that we're doing here, the very high is definitely good enough. So once all that is set, we're going to say OK to that. We're going to take a quick look just at some of the clip art that we have here. I should know better on when this was introduced into Aspire and Vectric. I don't think it was 10. I think it was maybe even back in version 8. Can't quite remember, but we have clip art specified here now. So we have any clip art that you have on your computer in the correct folder or in the online portal that Vectric now has is kind of displayed here. You could click on any one of these and notice that I don't have them downloaded. They are listed here. They're just kind of hanging out there in the cloud, not cluttering up my hard drive or my own disk space until I actually need that. So a basic way to enter in a clip art is just kind of select it to download it, drag it over, get a little green button that says that it's downloading. It tells you that it has been downloaded. Now, if you've not done this before, it may ask you to connect and enter in your criteria for the portal information and link your version of Aspire on that computer and link it to that computer to get the two linked together. I've already done that, so it's just now dragging that over, and there we are. So the clip art is a fairly easy one to manipulate and get around. We're able to see that on the 3D view as well. Once it's here, we could move and drag that around anywhere on the screen that we would like. Kind of works the same as a vector. It's showing grayscale right now. We could see that also on the 3D view by grabbing that. 3D objects were also able to move around, unlike with the 2D object. Here, going back to the 2D view, we could scale, stretch, and kind of manipulate this a little bit like silly putty. I'm using Aspire right now, but everything so far that I've showed can also be done in vCarve Pro. And in fact, everything that I'm going to be doing today here is capable of working in vCarve Pro just the same way. If you're not familiar with the differences between Aspire and vCarve Pro, for those that have not seen Aspire, you may be looking at this and saying, well, there's no difference. I don't see a difference. Well, the main difference is on this modeling tab right here. If you have vCarve Pro, you will notice that you do not have all of these icons that are listed here. You only have a few across the top here, and that's just the import and the very basic controls of 3D modeling. With Aspire, we have a lot more controls to be able to design and draw three-dimensionally. We're not going to get into that today. Today, we're only working with vCarve Pro type functions. So I'm going to select our component and just hit the delete on the keyboard. That gets rid of that component, and we're going to start with a fresh screen and a design of what we have here. So I'm going to go through the steps again to design and lay out assign similar to what we have here, figure out how to toolpath it, and get it ready for our machine. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of enter in some text. Just using the text tool. And I had used a couple different fonts for this. And I hope I am spelling all correctly. So I am going to also want to have that capital. I'm going to change this font here. So any font that you have on your computer is also going to be listed in this font list. The font that I used in the demo was a stencil style font, even though I'm not using it as a stenciling. It just was one that kind of liked the looks of it. So any font that you already have on the computer is also going to be installed here. Once the font is there, we could change and resize, move that around and place it. The next set of text that I want to add is the coffee or loading, the word loading here. So same thing, going into the text tool. Spelling it out. And this is, I want to change the font or have a different font for down below. Again, just using the font drop down, selecting the font that I would like to use. Now I'm going to set the option for bold. So it's always kind of wondered why I would want to have in VCarve Pro the option to set bold. Well, what happens is the bold just kind of fattens up all the fonts, the font just a little bit, changes that little there, so we can see that that opened up some there. So we'll say close there. I want to have both of these aligned to one another. So selecting the text, using the align functions in center, right and left, select close. Before I get really into resizing, I want to bring in the three-dimensional model now, so just so I could have everything on the space and kind of work it around and see what we could get for the best layout. There's two ways that I'm going to do this and two options that we're going to use. So one, in the Clipart, I did find a coffee cup. I believe I should remembered where that was. Maybe objects and people. There's a coffee mug, and then there's the coffee cup. So we could just drag that over and have that on the screen just for kind of placement right now. You can see that maybe the text needs to be a little bit smaller in X and Y, or maybe just the X value. We could change the size of that by selecting the font and just gonna squish that in a little bit. And just kind of moving and shifting things around. You could also shift by selecting the object and using the arrows on the keyboard. Sometimes that is a way to only be able to move. I use that one quite a bit if I have like the Y placement just right, but I want to play with the right and the left side of it. So I might select it and use the right arrow or the left arrow only to move back and forth. The one drawback to being able to do that is the undo function. So every time you move it, that makes an undo point. So if you use arrows quite a few times and you're like, it's not quite right, I want to get back to the way that I originally had it before I even tried to move it, you're going to have to hit that Control Z several times before we get back to where it was originally. So once we have kind of the layout, getting a little bit closer to where I think I want to have it, we could still modify a little bit more. I have designed and drew in a rectangle here with a little scroll loading symbol. Just simply use that by drawing in a rectangle. Now I might want to have that rectangle to be the same width as our text across the top and the bottom, which they're already the same, I believe. So if we could figure that out by going to selecting the text, looking at the bottom side, and we can see the width is 8 5/8. Selecting the other one, we're not quite the same. It's a little bit smaller here across the width, but it somewhat looks the same. Might be all right with the way it looks. So we're just kind of modifying the shape and the location of where this is. I want to have this rectangle centered between the two text in height-wise. So one thing that we do is we could select both text, hold the shift key down to center this here. So it's not going to quite work, but I'm just going to show what happens here. So well, that's not right. And what has happened is, remember when you go to use the centering tool or the alignment tools, it is centering all selected objects to the last selected objects. So if I want to have the text centered within this object, it did exactly what we asked it to do, but it centered the two texts as separate items. So I'm going to select both texts by using the shift key to select the opposite one, hitting the G on the keyboard to group that together. So now when we select one, the other one will also become selected. Now that allows me to select that text seen as one item, hold the shift key down to select the rectangle, and now I could use the center. So it just shifted into the center and we're good there. The next item that we need to display and draw in here is the loading bar. And it's kind of doubled up here. Notice when we come back over to our preview, see what it looks like here. We have this outline here, and then internally we have another outline here. So we have to think about not just what it looks like as the drawing, but what it is going to look like and what kind of vectors are we going to need to be able to toolpath for this. So what we are first going to do is offset that line inwards using the offset layout. That selected vector, I'm going to offset inward by, say, 60 thousandths, just to see. Looking all right. That's enough to get us a line. Might want to go maybe a little bit more. I'm going to go 80. I'm not deleting that line yet, just left it there. That's looking a little bit better. So select that and remove that line. So that is what we will use for the border of the loading box. Now we also need another vector in here to be able to select and toolpath against to create the actual bar that's getting scrolled across, or the loading of it. So I'm going to offset inward again, so I'm only selecting the other line, the offsetted line, and I'm going to offset in again another 80 thousandths. So if we left it this way, this is going to give us a bar that is completely already completed. But for our sign, we want to have that to be almost loaded maybe, or a little bit farther. So just clicking and dragging that around. Be careful not to drag the actual file or the whole object, but just scaling that. So that is kind of what we have for the general outline of the sign. We want to create a border to go around this. The way I want to have this is maybe have 1/4 of an inch material be around the outside. So at the present time, I don't know exactly what size to make that. I could just select all of these objects, holding the shift key down to select that. I happen to deselect. And if you look at the bottom right corner of the software, it gives you a X and Y, or a width and height dimension. So that is the width and then also the height. So I'm just going to jot those numbers down. So when we create a square or a rectangle for the border, we will just set this rectangle to be the size of what we specified here, or what we read and have written down. So we'll go 12.13. I'm not going out as many decimals as it was reporting, just because we're not going to see that anyway. Selecting create and close. So just a note, generally I don't worry about placing the placement of any of the objects using the tools over here. I use the alignment tools quite often, these tools here. So I already know that everything that I have on the display is centered within the job. Now I also want to take this rectangle and do the same thing, center that within the job, and just as we would hope to expect, that it is right at the outline of what we wrote down. Now we want to take that line and offset it outwards by 1/4 of an inch, because that's kind of what the border is that I want to be able to pocket out around everything here. Coming into offset, I'm going to go outwards by a distance of 0.25. And 0.25 is one that most of us probably know, but what if we wanted to offset out at, you know, I don't know, 51 1/28. You know, we're not going to memorize that and don't know what that is, but we could always go 51 over 1/28 and then hit equals, and that is going to do the math right there in that text box. So that's a good little trick to remember and know if you're not familiar with that already. So setting the distance to offset outwards by 1/4 of an inch. There that line is, and let's create one more border, because we're going to use this line as a pocket toolpath. And if we use that as a pocketing to create somewhat of a frame, we're not going to be able to use that vector also as the cutout path. So I'm going to offset outwards again. By this time, I'm going to go 1/2 of an inch. And come in here, and I no longer need that line, so I'm just going to delete it, get rid of it. So now we're able to start looking at our toolpaths to create this this job. A few things that we want, a few toolpaths that we're going to use. We're going to use a pocketing toolpath, a 3D finishing toolpath. We may use a 3D roughing toolpath, a V-carving toolpath, and a profile, or maybe even a couple profile cuts. So right now, the first thing that is going to be the easiest toolpath to do is the V-carving toolpath. So we're going to select everything that we want to have as a V-carving. So I'm going to select all of the items, going over to the toolpath side, and selecting to do a V-carving engraving toolpath. So I've unchecked all this because you'll find that this is the way it is by default. The V-bit that we're going to use, or I'm going to use, is a 90-degree V-bit. I'm going to come down and then just simply click calculate and preview what this is going to look like. Now it looks okay, other than this depth here. I want to limit that to a flat depth. I don't like that it went so deep, so I just want to recess it just a little bit to create more of a flat pocketed area. We do that by using that flat depth that was checked. So I added the option to limit the depth. So this is another question that I get quite often is, in V-carving, how do we limit the depth? Well, for the most part, V-carving by itself, the depth is determined by the width of the selected vectors. So in this case, where this line is separated by 80 thousandths of an inch using a 90-degree V-bit, means that the total depth of this area of cut is going to be 40 thousandths, 0.04. So limiting that to a flat depth of 1/8 of an inch is going to limit this area here to that 1/8 inch flat depth. Let's calculate, and just to see what this looks like, I should have reset the preview first. So doing so, and then preview the toolpaths. There's a couple things that I'm not crazy about here. One is we also limited the depth of the cut within our font up top. And then also all these lines back and forth here, it is also using the V-bit to do an area clearance of that. So I don't want that. So we're gonna back up just a little bit and take a look at this V carving. We're gonna create two separate V carving for this. So one is going to be just only selecting this loading bar, and I'm going to use a larger area clearance tool. This is a benefit of Aspire 10 or VCarve Pro 10, to where it will allow you to select more than one profile bit to get, so if we wanted to use yet another larger one to get into more detail, we could select another bit and just build up a list of bits here. But for this part, I think that 1/8 inch bit is going to be just fine for us. Still limited to 1/8 of an inch deep. And this time I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to go loading bar. And creating and giving your toolpaths names is going to help you keep track of what is happening later down the road. When you come into VCarve Pro next week and you look and you just see all these default names, VCarve 1, VCarve 2, you can have no idea what any of those are doing. You have to go in and select each one individually to see what lines to go with and such. So having them a name now knows that when I come back a week from now, I can, oh, that's a loading bar, that must have something to do with this section right here. So with that part done, I'm going to come back into the V carving, selecting only the text, and that's still grouped together. That's the reason why I select one, both were selected. I'm going to uncheck the flat area clearance tool. I don't need to use that. And come down and click calculate after giving it a name, the text, and calculate. I'll reset this preview and see what would look like now by previewing all the toolpaths. Looking a little bit better. We don't have the flat clearance here, and we've got a much smoother bottom clearance here. So the next step that I want to do is pocket out all of this area in between, or everything, to make room for our relief carving here to be carved into this section here. So to create a pocketing toolpath, I can't just select this outer border here and have the pocketing avoid our 3D model. So I need to create a profile or a vectors around our 3D clip art. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the drawing side, select our 3D component, and use our little tracing tool as a bitmap trace. So even though it's a grayscale and it's a 3D image, we're still able to use the tracing tool as if it were a picture. So it works just the same way as if it were an image that we imported. I'm going to use the threshold over here, bringing it all the way to the right to make this. So it is going to trace around the outside and then around the inside of the handle here. So with that done, we'll preview it to see what this looks like. And we are good. A couple things that I want to do, I'm noticing that we're kind of staggered right there. There was another project that I was doing that I needed to have a much tighter fit. I didn't want the profile to be any curves made up in that profile. So this time I'm going to bring that corner fit, going to lower that down a little bit and preview to see what we have now. So yeah, that is a thing that gave a much smoother contour flowing curves to the shape. Once we're happy with that, we could select OK and close. So that just gave us a boundary vector around the 3D image. And it is a grouped vector, and we know it's grouped because we don't see it as a dotted line. If we wanted to manipulate just part of this, we would have to ungroup and select that each individual item. But for our purposes here, having that as a grouped item is going to be useful. So I don't have to remember to come in here and also select the area with the inside of the handle. I could just select that vector. So to create the pocketing toolpath, I'm going to select the border that we just created, holding the Shift key down, selecting the border to contain the pocketing within, coming into the toolpath side, and we're going to create a pocketing toolpath. Oh, well, I said pocketing toolpath, but my brain said click on profile. So I'm going to click on the pocketing toolpath and select the bit that we're going to use. So I might, the 1/4 inch cutter really isn't going to get into this area here. And I think we're going to be okay with that. But a 1/4 inch cutter is probably what I want to use. I don't want to go much bigger to get around that, some of that detail. So yeah, 1/4 inch cutter, select the multiple passes. This is a question, how deep should we go? Not sure. We have to do a little research to find that out. We could guess, but we don't want to have to do that. We want to be more precise. So I'm just going to calculate this just to show what's going to happen here and preview all toolpaths again. We can see it is profiling around and pocketing around our 3-dimensional model here. But we want to have that pocket to be at the depth. Oh, there's another problem we have. It's wiping out the V carving that we've already entered in there. So we want the depth of this pocket to be the thickness of the relief carving that we brought in, or that clip art. To be able to determine what that is, a couple ways of doing it. The one that is, I believe, the easiest way is coming into, I'm going to close this, coming into this option right here that says set. I'm going to click that, and then right down here, this gives the position that the model is in relative to the material. So the darker section here, from top to bottom, is our material thickness of 3/4 inch. The lighter brown is the model. And we can see the total model thickness here is 1482. So that is sitting, I'm going to bring that down into the material just a little bit, and let's bring it down into the material, a number that I'm going to remember, and that number is 0.05. And the reason why I'm bringing it down into the top of the material, so if we were setting this directly at the top, our Z0 is going to have to be, very precise, as if when we're coming up and over top of this, if we had zeroed to a board that has a slight cup to it or irregularity across the top of it, and we zeroed down here at a higher spot on that board, but our model is over here, as it comes up and cuts, since this area here was higher in thickness than it is in the center, we may not actually cut or carve any of the new material out here. So by bringing and setting our model down into the material a little bit, it is going to help ensure that we get a full carving, and that bit is going to completely touch and cut all of our material. So again, I'm going to set it to a more memorable number like 0.1 or 0.5. And I'm actually also going to write that down as a note so I could remember later. Years ago, I'd be able to remember what that number is, but today, not so much. The other thing that I want to write down and remember is our model thickness, and that is 0.1482. So the combination of the 0.05 and our material thickness is what we want to create that pocketing cutout to be. So clicking OK to this, coming back into our pocketing toolpath, and setting that cut depth. Now, it's somewhat easy math for us here, but if we had, again, instead of 0.05, if it was a very odd, hard number to add up, we could just simply add in 0.05 plus 0.1482, and then when we hit equals, it is going to equate that for us and give us a value. Another couple things that I saw in doing this, we're only going in not very deep, and it says that we're making 2 passes. I'm quite certain that my machine is capable of doing all this in 1 pass. So there's 2 ways of doing this, actually three ways. One, if I know I always want to allow this cutter, this 1/4 inch cutter, to cut deeper than what it is happening here, like for the next time I use it and forever, I would come in to select and change the pass depth to a greater number. 1/8 of an inch, that's very conservative for a 3/4 inch cutter. Rule of thumb would be no more than 1 1/2 times the diameter. So rule of thumb would be 3/8 of an inch in 1 pass. So I'm going to go with that rule and specify that pass depth there. Select apply. So now we're down to 1 pass. Another way of doing it is if I knew that just this once I only wanted to change that pass depth to 1/8 of an inch, I would click the edit button here and change the pass depth to what I would like it to be. Or if I knew that I wanted to have, say, 3 passes, and I didn't want to have to do that math to figure out how deep I was, how many times it's going to make, we could come in here and edit passes and tell it down here to make 3 passes, and then you would set the passes. But for this project, 1 pass is enough. Another thing I'm going to do is change that offset from a offset to a raster. The reason for that is if we are cutting this out of lumber, this pocketing, spiraling type inwards, we're going to see all of these marks showing up in the bottom finish of our material. And I want it all flowing in the correct and same direction. So a little easier sanding, it may show up less in the material by going in the one direction. It may take a little longer to cut, especially as it comes over here, because it's going to kind of bounce back and forth around here rather than spiraling its way around. But I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of time for a little less sanding later on and a little cleaner product. So having that to our raster, I'm going to select calculate, reset this preview, and preview this once more. And again, while I'm talking here, ask questions. If you got a question, just add it into that chat, and I will do my best to get it answered. All right, so that is made room for our 3-dimensional carving here. And our text here has gone away. Some of you may know what that's going on there. Some of you are like, well, what happened? Well, we could fix that. What that is we're starting at the top of the surface of our product in the material. And we're V-carving down from the top, but we've already pocketed out some of that area, so we're like wiping that text away. So we need to create a start depth in both of our V-carving. So going into the loading bar, and we want to increase the start depth from 0 to the depth that we pocketed out. Now, don't confuse the start depth with where you've zeroed. I know a lot of people tend to try to fight like, well, a zero to the table surface or a 0 to the, this has nothing to do with that. This is only starting at the top of the material, but what we really want to start is below the amount that we've pocketed out, which was the 0.1982. And then from this point, we're going down and limiting the depth to that 1/8 of an inch. Going to set the same start depth for our text. And we're going to bring that down to also 0.1982. And let's preview all of these toolpaths once more to see if we're getting what we want. All right, it's looking right. There's a couple things that we'll take a look at, and that's in the ordering of cut, what to cut first. Not paid any attention to that yet. Normally, I do set up my toolpaths in the order that I will be cutting, but in some cases, like we just found out, that I kind of redid things a little bit backwards, and I'll have to go in and set the order. We could still clear that up. But for now, what I want to do is create a 3D finishing toolpath. In the beginning, I said we may or may not do a roughing pass for something like this, where that cut depth is only, 3/16 of an inch deep, and that's only at its deepest point, which we've already removed some of that material at its deepest point. So for something like this, we're not going to need a roughing toolpath. I'm going to go straight to a finishing toolpath. So to do so, there's a few ways of creating this finishing toolpath. One is we could do it by the model boundary, which is only this model. We could do it by the material, which will really not what we want to do here, because it will 3D carve all of this, which is just pointless to do. Or we could do it by a selected vector. The selected vector is what we're going to use, and the selected vector is going to be, that's it, our border here. Now, I mentioned earlier that this was a grouped object. It's still grouped, but we'll notice on our preview, I'm just going to close our here and just view our preview again. Notice that we did not get any of the inside of this cut out. And the reason for that is that 1/4 inch cutter just could not fit into this area. So we are going to need to use our 3D finishing toolpath to also clean out that area. And if we are going to do that, I cannot have that selected there because it knows and sees that as the boundary as well. It would not cut into that area. So we're going to have to ungroup our border vector. And to do so, I'm just having that vector selected using the U on the keyboard to ungroup that. Could have come over here also and click the ungroup icon button here. So going back into our finishing toolpath, the selected vector, I'm going to come over here and unselect or deselect that inside of that handle. The 1/8 inch ball nose, for something smooth like this or that's very shallow, doesn't have any great detail to it, the 1/8 inch V-bit or ball nose is probably going to be more than enough to get all the detail that we need. So that's why I'm going to leave that. Just quickly look at the edit to see what my step over is. Anywhere from 8 to 12% is generally enough. And I also typically like to have my feed rates for the X and Y to be the same. The reason for that is all 3 axes are going to be moving at the same time. And having them set differently is kind of like running in a 3-legged race. If I'm running and teamed up with a Olympian runner, and I tie myself to his leg and we're off for the three-legged race, does not mean we're going to win. The only thing it does is means that I'm going to slow him down. So that's what's happening here. If we have the Z moving at the different rate or a slower rate than the X and Y, the X cannot go or get to this feed rate because the Z is holding itself back, or holding the other axes from moving as fast as they're capable of. So I like to have both feed rate and plunge rate set to be the same in a 3-axis finishing or 3-axis moves. So with that changed, we'll select OK. And then with that selected vector, we are good. I'm going to raster, give it a name. In this case, I'm just going to leave it named 3D Finish. We only have one object here that we're finishing. Now, if we had 2 different cups, a right and a left, one on one side, one on the other, I might give it a name of, relief carving on the right, relief carving on the left, and such. So for this one, I'm going to leave that as the default name and select calculate. We now have our 3D finishing toolpath here, and I will come over and preview what this looks like. So there we have it. So it is did toolpath out around here, and we could see that couple areas that we may not have gotten around here. So I want to take a look at what is going on with this 3D finishing toolpath. It did come out, that's good. One thing that I wanted to point out that I actually already had that setting set with this offset boundary. So normally by default, that boundary is set to 0. I'm going to set it to 0 just so you can see what is going to happen this time. So calculate that. And notice this time that the 3D finishing toolpath does not come out and kind of finish off the edge. The reason for that is the bit is contained within our selected vector. So the tip of the bit is not reaching that line. It's inside of that line by the diameter of the cutter. So just reset this preview, and we'll see what it looks like with that boundary set to 0. I think I might have my preview settings on a higher resolution. It's taken a little bit longer to preview things. I'll point out and show where that is just to see. So now notice that we didn't quite get a nice finish as we had before. We've got a little bit of a flat section that is left there, and that is only because the bit is being limited by that vector. Is not able to get all the way out here. So that is the reason for that boundary offset. So I want to have that boundary offset enough to where the 1/8 inch cutter is able to get out and then down off of this. So I set that up to be 0.1, anything greater than half the diameter or anything greater than the radius of the cutter will work. Select OK. And now zooming in to here, we could see how that profile, and I'll just leave it zoomed in as it's doing this preview. We'll see how it's cleaning up that edge. So preview the visible toolpath only. Notice how when it gets up here, some of that is getting cleaned up right along there, and that is because of that outside. We're allowing the toolpath to extend out beyond that selected vector just a little bit, but we're still contained within that vector. The final thing that we need to do is produce the final cutout for this. So we're going to go to the 2D view, select the outside vector, come into the profile toolpath. Now, if I don't remember what we had for the depth, I could simply enter in the Z value. Z is the material thickness, and if I hit equals, it gives me 0.75. Or I could come in here and say Z plus 0.02, because that's what I want to, the distance that I want to cut deeper into the table, and hit equals, and it gives me that math. So using math within the text boxes here is a great help. So I'm going to use that same 1/4-inch cutter, 8 passes to go through 3/4. That's too much. It must not have been set, applied it correctly from the last time. So just to show how I could change that here, just going to come in here, number of passes, going to change that to 2, click set, then OK. Preview, I get this warning, I'm going to cut all the way through. Get in the habit of always paying attention to here. Don't just assume that you know what you were doing and know that it's right, even though you know what you're doing. You may have not accidentally hit that decimal, and instead of cutting 3/4 or 77 deep, you're cutting 770 deep, which is your machine's going to try. It's not going to get there, but it'll try. So we'll say OK. And I didn't pay attention close enough. So I have that set to be cutting directly on the line. I want to offset it to the outside. So double clicking, selecting to go to the outside, and then come down and click calculate. Again, paying attention, select OK, and do a preview of all the toolpaths once more. Now, the one thing that I will probably need to do, unless I have a, well, here's, look at this V carving. That's an order kind of thing. That's not quite right. But this is also a nice trick to use that start depth to be able to paint. So if I wanted that lettering to be painted differently, a different color, right now when it is done at that point, just gonna, before it does the pocketing, do paint some of those letters, let that paint dry, and then come back and do that pocketing, which will leave and remove all of that overspray and leave just the paint within the V-carved area. All right, that is looking like a finished sign. Now there's a few things that I did as far as the presentation to see what this is going to look like as a completed file. I changed some of the coloring around. We could do that by setting the machined area to be by the color, by the fill color, or I could set the individual vectors by a selected color. So with this down here, I'm going to set that to be black. That is this area right here, selecting the loading bar, which is the perimeter out here because it's the V-carve section of it. Also, I could change that to black there, but that one there, I'm going to go back, change it around. I see the color red there. Change that. So it's a way to see what this is going to look like when we go to cut, or as a finished product or as a paint on it. So kind of gives you a way to play around with the aesthetics of it before actually painting it. The one final thing that we want to do before saving these toolpaths out is think about the order that everything is going to get cut. So right now, we have it cutting in the order that shows up in this list. If we don't have a tool changer, we might want to save these out separately. And if we have a tool changer, well, we might want to think about the order that we're able to cut these out in. Normally, in this case, other than that aspect that I said about painting, I wouldn't want to do that V carving in the way that I did. It's a pretty rough, deep cut that's going to happen. I would probably want to start with this pocketing toolpath first. So I'm going to take that pocketing toolpath and move it up in the list. Then we have this toolpath here, which is using an 1/8 inch cutter. That might be an okay one to do next. The loading toolpath is the V-carve that is going around this border here, and then also a little bit of V-carving around the inside there. That's an okay spot for that one. This V-carving is the actual text. Then the final 3D finishing toolpath would run, then finally pocketing out and removing. So that is basically all of the steps required to create and combine 3D clip art along with some two-dimensional items and get that depth set just right on that three-dimensional carving there. So hopefully everyone has found that somewhat useful. Anyone out there have any questions about what you saw and what you didn't see? So we're going to, at this point, I will trust that everybody that is still here is here for, because they want to learn. And I'm going to just unmute everyone and allow people to unmute themselves if you want to speak up and ask the question.
Okay.
If not, just use the chat window and we're good.
We do 2000s.
So if you have a question, you could either use the chat window to speak up or unmute yourself and speak up.
I hopped on the video, the Zoom chat a little bit late, and so I was wondering if there would be a recording of this posted on the ShopBot website afterwards.
Yes, there will be. It is has been recorded and has been being recorded. So as long as the web and all technology works correctly, we will have this recorded.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
You're welcome.
Ryan,
Yes.
you did a very good job. Thank you.
Yeah,
we
thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have a quick question if you have a second.
Sure do.
Sorry, I didn't realize my mic was muted. When you were in the modeling tab originally, when you imported the coffee cup, did you, I don't have Aspire, but it appeared that you could have set that vector boundary instead of doing a trace right there in the, that vector boundary.
Mm-hmm.
It appeared that you could have done that in the modeling tab. Is that true?
The modeling tab. There is, yes, there is also a tracing somewhere on this modeling tab, but it's basically the same.
It
way.
looks like
it's
right
it's the same thing. Right here. Yeah, it basically does the same thing. The only difference here for this one, I don't believe that one would have put a vector around the inside of that handle. But let's give it a try. I'm just going to delete put that there, selecting there, and no, it did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But is
So
this a feature only for Aspire?
that I believe it is.
So a shortcut for a VCarve Pro user would be to do the trace. That's great.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I got a quick question. Still trying to figure out why you wouldn't cut out the type after pocketing pocketing the larger surface area.
Yeah. So let's take a look at this preview. So I'm going to reset the preview. And so if I wanted to V-carve only the text first, and let's see, preview visible toolpaths. So you can see it's not quite, it doesn't look right for one, but that's okay. But what we're doing is, remember, we gave that a start depth of that 0.19. So it's cutting down into the material 0.19 plus the depth of the actual V carving itself. So the depth that is being cut out here is quite a bit of material that's being removed. But this is also a nice way of, at this point, if you carve this out, you could paint this, all those letters here, and then come down and select that pocketing toolpath. This one right here, and I'll preview what that looks like so we can see how that is coming around now and removing that 0.19 of material to expose the actual height and the depth of that V carving. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, sure does. And I guess I was curious, not having done this before. So through your experience, that pocketing pass with the end mill doesn't create any like chip out with some of the type that's already been cut. I'm like,
Yeah.
if I'm picturing you know, a grained wood per se versus like an MDF.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, for some reason with some of those finer areas, I was
Yeah, sometimes that can happen. Think about direction of cut a lot. So if you are cutting with lumber, I didn't talk about that at all, which I usually do. But when setting up a profile cut or any types of cutting, you have this direction of cut here, climb versus conventional. If I was working with a grained or natural material, or especially a heavy grain material, I would not have selected conventional. I would have had it selected as a climb cut. That is going to give a smoother cut 99% of the time when cutting natural product. This climb conventional is, if you know from a handheld router, using the conventional path is a left or right motion. But if you're putting an edge on some like oak or ash or something that has a lot of grain that likes to chip out, when you're going left or right, it grabs that grain and kind of rips it out and chunks it out. But if you brace yourself really good and hold that router and pull it from right to left, that gives you a smoother, kind of chipping type of cut. So cutting natural product, natural materials to climb would be the way to help avoid that blowout.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ryan.
Yes.
Ken Kelsey, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
One point, Joe, in the pocketing tool, I know you have the option to pick two different tools, like a larger bit and a 1/4 inch, and then an 1/8 inch to do the detail.
Mm-hmm.
I believe you said you could pick more than one tool, more than two tools. Did I?
Yes, that is a feature of Spire 10 and VCarve Pro 10, to where if you have the multiple tools here, we had one entered in here with an 1/8 inch. If I wanted to also really get finer detail, I could have also come in here and selected a 16th inch or even much smaller than that and listed there. So now you can see there are 2 bits selected, and it kind of works the same way as the VCarve. Everywhere that the 1/8 inch bit will go, it will get that area first. Then any sections that the 1/8 inch did not get, it would use this smaller diameter bit to get. Then anywhere that these 2 bits did not get to, it would use the V bit to clear out the rest of that material.
Well, that just saved me a tremendous amount of time. We do large signs, and I pocket them all out with a 1/4 inch, and then go back for an 1/8 for the detail. But I'd really like to be pocketing them out with like a 1/2 inch or a 3/4 inch, and then step down to get into the detail. So I can actually use multiple bits in this clearance tool area that I never knew about.
Yes, absolutely.
So it'll just create a tool path for each bit that I say that I want to use.
Yep, exactly.
Perfect.
I did have yep, you're welcome. Had a question come in on the chat, and that is, how do I change the resolution of the 3-dimensional preview? In some cases, you want to have a little bit more detail or clarity in the preview. It does take a little longer to preview it, but if we go to the toolpaths tab and do the preview simulation quality, I already do have it set to the maximum. So let's just see what happens. This looks like setting that to the standard. And now, I'm sorry, preview all the toolpaths. We'll see that the overall preview went a lot faster. In this case, this side's job really didn't make that much of a difference. We're able to see a little bit of clarity difference here and maybe along this line there. But for the most part, in this project, having that set at the higher quality wasn't giving me a whole lot of added benefit. So no, not for 8.5 in vCarve Pro. We don't have that same option for being able to pocket out. Just quickly going here to draw a square. So for the V bit, we could only select one extra bit for the use flat area clearance tool. We're not able to select multiple bits. So this, what I'm looking at right now is the vCarve Pro 8.5. And then you can see Aspire has that, or version 10 of Aspire or version 10 of vCarve Pro would have the option to be able to select multiple bits.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, any other questions out there? All right, well, we're going to conclude with today's session. Thank you all for attending and have a great day.